a book that was written that was published by Emmaus?
Yes.
Okay, published by Emmaus. We have a few copies back there. They're $10 a copy. He doesn't make any money off that. That just covers the cost of printing. So if you're interested in those books, let me know afterwards. We also have a card that you can take with you, please, from Emmaus Emmaus Correspondence to be able to get to all the correspondence courses that are listed. It's interesting because some of the ladies here have been going through his book, and as the Lord has it, that was posted on Facebook. His father-in-law picked it up, who also was associated with Emmaus, and said, hey, my son-in-law, this great guy, lives in West, well, I don't know if he said great guy, but he said my son-in-law lives in West Palm Beach. He'd be glad to come out and teach this course. We thank him for coming out. A little bit of ground rules. Restrooms are right through there. We're going to have waters available and coffee also, and snacks. We're going to try to make it, we're already late, but we'll try to pick up some time as we go along. 10-minute break approximately every session at the end of each teaching session. Grab yourself some water, grab yourself some snacks. Avail yourselves of the restrooms, and with that, we'll just leave it to our brother. All right? Thank you, Joseph.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. So, like you said, my name is Joseph Starkey. So my father-in-law is a member of the Brethren. He actually ran a camp out in California that was Brethren run. And my book that he wrote was for Emmaus Worldwide. It's a curriculum series, so you can look up lots of lessons about Bible studies, and definitely be sure to grab a card from the back, information about it. So let me ask you, start off with this. Who here has any experience with apologetics? Either read something about it before? Who here has never heard before? What am I apologizing for? So when we talk about apologetics, this is a very important topic these days because I don't know if you've noticed, but we currently live in a society that is very confused about a whole lot of issues that at one point people weren't very confused about. You may have noticed this. And so as Christians, it's more important than ever that we understand why it is that we believe what we believe and be able to communicate that with people who don't think the same way that we do. And so what we're going to do here is go through a series of questions related to our faith, related to why we believe what we believe. And to start us off, we're going to start off with the question of, what do I do with doubt? And can doubt ever be a good thing? So when I use the word doubt, what comes to your mind? Doubting Thomas, yeah. Well, so when you hear the word doubt, what comes to your mind?
Unsure.
Being unsure.
Negative thinking.
Negative thinking, yeah. Well, what we're going to do here is we're going to do a little bit of role play. So I'm going to introduce you to somebody here in just a second. It's going to be me, named Mr. Keystar. And Mr. Keystar is a skeptic who used to be a Christian. And so Mr. Keystar is going to explain to you guys who he is, where he comes from, why he believes what he does, just for a few minutes. And then you guys are going to have a few minutes to ask Mr. Keystar some questions. All right? So let me get this here, turn it around. Good afternoon, everybody. As Mr. Starkey said, my name is Mr. Keystar, and I used to be a Christian, and I am now what I would call a seeking skeptic. And I wanted to explain to you all where I come from, why I believe what I believe, and take any questions that you may have for me. So I grew up as a Christian, Southern Baptist, don't hold that against me. And my father was a pastor, and I grew up on the Bible. I got all the little crowns and the Awanas, and grew up believing this and just really taking for granted that this is what was true. And as I got older, I began asking some questions. And whenever I would ask questions, my parents were always very loving and supportive, but they weren't very good at answering them. They generally told me, just have faith, just believe, that's all that matters. And as I got into high school, I began to look into these questions myself. My first question I began to ask was about Jesus himself, right? Well, it was about the Gospels. It was how do we even know Jesus actually existed? And so I come and lo and behold that there are in fact some historians who even doubt that Jesus existed at all. But then so I thought, okay, let's say Jesus did exist, but how do I know that the Gospels are reliable? Because these books are very old, and a lot can change in the few thousand years since it has been released. And I was looking into it, and there's a researcher named Bart Ehrman, who's a New Testament scholar, who went through all of the manuscripts, the original ancient manuscripts we have of the Old Testament, and he came up with something I never knew. Did you know there are over 400,000 manuscript variants in the New Testament? Meaning, of the manuscripts that we have, there are 400,000 differences between them. So that got me thinking, how can I trust that what we even have in this Bible is what they actually wrote if there are so many errors? And then I came out of high school, graduated, went to college, but I still held my faith because my Christian faith really meant a lot to me, really made a big difference. For context, we're role-playing right now a skeptic. Coming in, what is he doing? And as I went to college, I talked with my professors, I talked with some of my new friends there, and they began making me question why would I even believe in God to begin with? What do I even mean by God? Why do I need to believe in God? And as I looked through these questions, I was relying on God to answer about the world and life. I saw that science had answered so many of those questions for us that I just didn't need to believe in God. And so that's where really when these cracks started becoming fissures. And I started looking at some of my friends and what they believed. I had friends who were Muslim, friends who were Buddhist, friends who were skeptic, and I saw how sincerely they believed the things that they believed, just as much as my parents ever did in their Christianity. And so that got me realizing, people believe so firmly in what they believe. Who are we as Christians to say that what we think is true? And so as a result of that, I've moved away from the old ways of thinking. I'll always be grateful to Christianity for what it gave me, but in the end, I just can't be intellectually honest and consistent and think logically and believe that it's true. There are truths in it, to be sure, but the supernatural parts, the parts about Jesus, the parts about the Bible being reliable, I just can't hold to those anymore. And I'm seeking and looking for answers, and I can say I'm very content with that not knowing right now, and I hope to learn more as I go. So now what I'd like to do is take a few minutes for just any questions that you may have for me, for Mr. Keystar, as a skeptic. Yes, sir.
How many of those 400,000 variants actually change the text or the meaning of the Gospels?
Well, according to Bart Ehrman, if you take them just as an individual, it's usually a grammatical issue. However, 400,000 grammatical errors over 2,000 years kind of adds up to something that I'm just not sure I can trust it. It's a great question, great observation. What else? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Have you studied the Bible?
Oh, yes, sir. I grew up on it. I studied it very thoroughly, all 66 books. Like I said, I got all the little crowns and the Awana pen, memorizing the verses. So, yes, sir.
My information is that there are 5,000 Greek manuscripts that all agree with them at 98% coordination. So I don't think there's 400,000.
Well, there are 400, it is a fact that there are over 400,000 variations within the manuscripts. Not that there's 400,000 manuscripts, that'd be ridiculous. Right. But there are 400,000 variations in all of the ones that we have. And so when you compile those together, it's like playing the telephone game. When you play a telephone game and you have someone says something at the beginning of the line, and by the end of the line it's totally different. And so based on the evidence that we have, I just can't really conclude that what we have now is reliably what was originally written. It's a good question. Any other questions for me as a skeptic?
Do you believe that there is a God?
I used to believe that there's a God, but my first question, of course, would be then what do you mean by God? Because there are so many ideas of who and what God even is. There's the Christian idea of God as a monotheist. Then you have the Hindus who believe in the Christian God. They also believe in many other gods along with it. I actually have Hindu friends who have a little statue of Jesus on their altar along with their other gods. So I'm not entirely sure what I believe about God, partially because there's just so many ideas of what God means. And I love that question because so much comes down to it, doesn't it?
How do you believe? I want you to tell me, how do you exist?
That's a great question. As far as why I exist, science has come so far in explaining a naturalistic understanding of how the universe came to be over a very long time ago. And it's one of the most amazing things in nature, to think that we are made of the same stuff that stars are made of. And to think that over time, that life was able to change and grow and to become what it is today. And in many ways, we still don't know exactly. And I think that's the amazing thing about science and growing.
What do you change from?
I'm sorry?
What do you change from?
I'm not entirely certain, to be honest. I'm still searching for that myself. But what I have discovered is that the explanation of God did it, I just don't see a lot of evidence to support that there needs to be an extra entity in this. Any other questions? One more question, we'll move on.
What do you do with the argument of design for a God?
Great question. The argument of design for a long time I thought was a legitimate argument, a good argument, and I still understand why people believe it. However, what I began to realize is the problem with the argument from design is this idea of complexity. You see, what's complex to you may not be complex to somebody else. There are many things in nature that are complicated, but we know don't necessarily come from an intelligent designer. For example, we have emerging behavioral patterns in flocks of birds or even in geography, where things form that seem to look complicated, but we know have perfectly natural explanations. And so as a result, I've kind of dismissed the design argument. I understand it, but it doesn't really hold as much sway with me. Well, thank you all for your time, and I'm going to hand it back to Mr. Starkey now. Woo, 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 Wonder Woman's transformation. All right. All right, so that was just role play. Let me ask, how do we feel? How are we feeling after listening to Mr. Keystar talk there for a little while? A little frustrated, a little sad, little disappointed, yeah. Anybody feel
that what he's saying is not true?
Yeah, because something's wrong with it, isn't it? There's something wrong. How many people are a bit confused after listening to what he was saying? Maybe a bit curious about some of the points that Mr. Key. By the way, everything Mr. Keystar brought up are actual arguments that are made and actual things that are said. Who felt a little bit frustrated? You felt frustrated? How about even maybe a little bit angry? You kind of feel that little hot feeling come up from your belly, like, maybe a little bit scared even a little bit scared. Here's the thing. The reason many of us feel uncomfortable is because when it comes down to it, we aren't prepared to answer those questions. We know that something's wrong with what he's saying. But if we're not prepared with an answer, it becomes very easy for our emotions to get away from us. Now, if this is us here as adults hearing these questions, imagine being an 18, 19-year-old kid in college away from mom and dad for the first time. Did you know 70% of Christian students stop believing by the time they graduate college? 70% of Christian students have walked away from the faith by the time they graduate college. Why do you think that is?
Because scientists have come up with something else.
Mm-hmm.
That, the world exists by a big bang, by God.
So they hear alternative explanations of the world. Yeah.
There's a perverted gospel, social gospel, wealth gospel,
Mm-hmm.
that people think that they are actually saved when they're not.
Yeah, competing theories. Mm-hmm. Yeah, competing theories of that can sound very good. That can sound very convincing. Fundamentally, this is something Frank Turek, he's a famous apologist these days. He says it's really simple. He says because they weren't prepared to be confronted with those kinds of questions. Frank Turek says the reason they walk away, the reason they're talked out of Christianity is because they were never really talked into it. For a lot of kids, they believe what they believe because it's what mom and dad believe, but have never really had it explained to them, why do we believe that it is true? And that's a lot like a kid who gets really sick. I had a friend who has a few kids now, and she is, to say neat freak would be an understatement. She is the sort of person we used to say a spider would starve in her house. Just super clean all the time. So she has a young child, and again, always clean, always everything's disinfected. Well, kid gets old enough to go to preschool. What do you think happened to that child when they got to preschool? Why though? Why would the child get sick so often? He was sick all the time, the whole year.
Not introduced to disease.
Right. Because the environment this child lived in was so sterile, was so clean, her body, her immune system didn't have the experience dealing with bacteria and infection. So when the child went out into the world where there were these infections and germs and bacteria, his body was not prepared for it. And so was very susceptible to it. In the same way, many kids these days don't hear these kinds of questions until they're already out of mom and dad's house. And so when they get to college, when they go off on their own and they hear these questions, they haven't been prepared for them. And they can sound very convincing. They sound very attractive because they were never confronted with them before. You might say their intellectual immune system hasn't learned to filter out those bad ideas. So, what can we do about it? Well, first, it all comes down to the issue of doubt. The issue of doubt. And I want to start off with something that is not often talked about in church, which is when can doubt actually be a good thing? How many people here have ever exercised or played a sport, and by the time you're done, you feel that ache on that spot that you didn't even know you had a muscle? Usually after swimming or working really hard or something, you're like, wait, what even is that? Is that a thing? Tell me, why does that spot ache? Say again? Because it's a muscle that's not used. And so when you're suddenly using that muscle, it kind of aches a little bit. But now you'll notice, you know that muscle's there. So what can you start doing now? You can exercise. So the next time you do that exercise, what happens? It doesn't feel as sore. So doubt is like a weak muscle that needs strengthening. If there's a question or a concern or a confusion about our faith that we hadn't considered before, that means that that's an area that we haven't grown in yet. And just like with a weak muscle, what do you have to do? Do you ignore that weak muscle and hope that it goes away? No, because next time you do that exercise, you might do worse and make it sore. You might injure it. So what can you do? Use it. Just like when you feel that sore muscle and that exercise you've been doing, that's an opportunity to exercise it and make it stronger. Doubt can drive us to seek answers and strengthen our faith. If we're doubting something, if there's a question we don't know the answer to, if there's something about Bible, Christianity, Jesus, God that doesn't make sense in our minds, go after it. Look into it. Investigate it. Find the answer to it. Asking hard questions leads to a deeper understanding of why we believe what we believe. Because here's the key, guys. If we actually think that what I believe is true, if I really believe that Christianity is true, that the Bible is reliable, then I should not be afraid of any questions, because any questions that I ask, there will be an intellectually satisfying answer, if it's true. So please, if you're doubting, go after that. Right? And tackle that doubt. Look for it, research it, ask questions about it. Don't be afraid of it. Now, when can doubt be a bad thing? There are two ways that doubt can be bad. First is if we ignore it. If we try to shove it away in the corner of our mind, pretend like it isn't there, bury it way down deep. Here's the problem with doing that, is that it doesn't go away. And if anything, it starts to grow. Out of sight, out of our mind, it grows and festers, and it begins to affect us. And those tendrils reach from our head, they reach down to our hearts, and the harder we ignore it, the more it grows in us. Doubts cannot be ignored, because they will grow whether you see them growing or not. I personally know many people who at one point were what I thought strong Christians. And then years later I meet them and they've just gone way the opposite direction. And after a lot of discussion, it's because I find out it's because they had questions that they were afraid of. And they ignored it. But that just kind of twisted and grew inside of them without them even realizing what it was doing. So that's the first way that doubt can be bad, is if we ignore it. The second way is actually the opposite, using it as an excuse, putting it on a pedestal. Because you see, there are many people who use doubt as an excuse to go and drive further from God. If you don't bury your doubt, some people put it on a pedestal and say, oh, look, here is my reason why I can't trust God. Here's why Scripture is not true. Therefore, I now have the justification to go and live life how I want to live it. Rather than addressing it, rather than looking at it and figuring it out, they put it up on a pedestal and say, here's my justification for why I can live how I want to right now. Any of us know people who have done that? Any of us been the person who's done that sometimes? Absolutely. Here's some very important points to understand, guys, about doubt. Doubt is a lot like a frog. Dissecting it will teach you all there is to know about it, and it usually dies in the process. So doubt needs to be examined. It needs to be looked at. It needs to be asked about. Okay? One of my favorite stories about this is Jesus and John the Baptist's disciples. So at one point, John the Baptist is in prison. Anybody remember why John the Baptist was in prison?
His brother's sister.
Yeah, hey king, maybe you shouldn't be, marrying your sister-in-law. Apparently it was a bit too much for the king, right? And so John the Baptist is in prison, and he's feeling very discouraged. He's feeling very distraught, very upset. He's fought so hard and so long for what's true. He's tried to do what's right, and now here he is in this cell, not knowing if he's going to live or die. And so he sent his disciples to Jesus to ask him a very simple question. I remember what the question was that John asked his disciples to ask Jesus. Anybody know? Yeah, are you the Messiah, or should I wait for somebody else? Now, notice first and foremost what was not Jesus' reaction. Jesus' reaction was not, excuse me? You saw the dove come down on top of me. Didn't you leap inside the womb when I just came near you? Like, what do you mean you're doubting, John? You have every reason to believe. No, that's not what Jesus did. What Jesus did is he turns around, doesn't answer. He turns around and he starts healing people. He makes the blind see. He makes the crippled walk. He makes the deaf hear. Then he turns back to the disciples, John's disciples, and he tells them, go and tell John all the things you've seen here. And that's it. You'll notice he didn't actually answer the question, did he? He didn't say, yes, I am, or no, I'm not. What did he do instead? He provided evidence. He gave him the evidence and said, now make up your mind who you say that I am. And then what's amazing is what happens after that. When the disciples leave, what did Jesus say about John after that? It says, no man born among women is greater than him. What? Hang on, he just doubted you. What do you mean no one's greater than him? Shouldn't you be upset with him? No. Because at that moment, John didn't bury his doubts. He didn't ignore them. He didn't elevate his doubts as an excuse to live how he wanted to live. He confronted those doubts. He asked the questions. And Jesus knows John's heart well enough to know that John would believe based on the evidence. And so what does this tell us? It tells us God welcomes honest questions. God wants your honest question. No emphasis on honest, right? Because some people play games, right? Some people can try to play games with this. God doesn't play games. But if we have a genuine confusion, a genuine uncertainty, God wants us to bring that to Him. I'll say it again, if what we believe is true, we should expect there to be reasonable answers to any reasonable question we ask. Now, we may not get the answer we want, right? I want to know why certain evil things happen in the world. I want to know why God does things a certain way. Is God obligated to answer me? No. Read Job sometime if you want to know what God's opinion of that attitude is. But God will always provide me with the evidence that I need to make a rational decision. Jesus didn't give John a yes or no. He gave John the evidence that John needed to make his own decision. Now, I want to address two groups here, parents and students. So parents, first and foremost, what do I do with this? Make your home a safe and comfortable place to ask questions and express doubt. One of the main reasons that kids don't ask these hard questions is because they're afraid of what their parents will think. Will my parents be disappointed in me that I'm doubting? Will my parents be angry that I'm asking these questions? And sometimes the answer is unfortunately yes, isn't it? There are some parents out there who get scared by these questions and react badly. Make sure your home is a place that your kids know they can express their questions and doubts. Second, provide apologetics resources in your home. There are books, there are videos. So have resources available that you can go to for that. We'll discuss resources at the end of the whole thing. And then finally, this is a big one. If you don't know the answer, that's exciting. Mom, Dad, why does the Bible say this thing when it says this other thing doesn't make any sense? I don't know the answer to that. Don't get scared. Get excited, because guess what you can do now? You know, that's a great question, little Johnny. Let's find out together. Let's look into this together and see what the answer is. Because if what we believe is true, there will be an answer to that question that is intellectually satisfying. So that's exciting if your kid asks a question you don't know the answer to. Think about what a bonding experience that is, by the way. I'll tell you right now, few things earn a child's respect more than their parents being honest about their own shortcomings. I can tell you right now, I have some of the best parents in the world, and one of the things that always got my respect for them the most was when they would apologize to me for something that they did wrong. It gave me so much respect for them. And then it's the same thing when we're honest with our kids. That's a great question. I don't know the answer. Your kids will respect you more for it. And use that as an opportunity to go after the answer together. Now, first, this is advice for kids that you can give your kids as well here. First of all, make sure they know God is not angry or disappointed when they have questions and doubts. Again, doubts and questions don't anger or disappoint God. Of course we have doubts. We live in a world that's so full of darkness, that's so full of sadness and pain. Of course we're going to have doubts. In fact, what's the one time that Jesus was astonished in all the Bible? Anybody remember? What was the one time that it actually said Jesus was astounded by this? The centurion who comes to him, says, heal my servant, Jesus, I'll come with you. And what did the centurion tell him?
Say the word.
Yeah, you don't need to come, just say the word. In other words, that faith. Jesus is astounded, like, wow, you actually have this much faith? God's not disappointed by our questions and doubts. Okay? And don't let doubts paralyze you, to tell our kids. Instead, let it drive them to pursue answers. Don't bury it. Don't feel like you have to hide it. Don't put it on a pedestal. Don't use it as a justification of how you want to live. Treat it like a frog. Dissect it. Learn about it, because that's how it dies. My favorite quote here, Frederick Buechner says, doubts are the ants in the pants of faith. They keep it awake and moving. It's also like the pebble in the shoe. It's the thing that keeps you going, because it can be easy to get complacent sometimes, can't it? To get a little complacent in our faith and think, oh yeah, I've made it. Until something happens, we realize how little we actually know. So make sure that our kids are aware that it's okay to ask these questions. So that's the issue of doubt. Question number 1. Now, question number 2, what we'll do here is we'll go 2 questions, and then we'll do a break, and then 2 questions and break, and we'll do that. So we got second question here, then we'll take a break. What is apologetics? Now that we've talked about doubt, now that we've talked about what it is and how to handle it, well, where does apologetics fit into all of this? Well, first I want to share what we call the Apologetics Creed here from 1 Peter 3:15. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense, the Greek is apologia, we'll talk about that, to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with, what 2 words do you see there? Gentleness and respect. So apologetics refers to giving a reasonable answer or defense to anyone who asks about the Christian faith. So the word is apologia. That's the actual Greek word that Peter uses there. And it literally is like a formal defense. Think like a courtroom. A lawyer, anybody here have experience in a courtroom, been in one, or on either side of the bar? Anybody here watch a movie with lawyers? Yeah. And so an apologia is the formal argument that a lawyer would give explaining why their side of the case is true. And so in the same way, apologetics is a formal defense of the claims of Christianity. Because Christianity makes a very big claim. It claims to be true. Not just that it sounds nice, not even just that it works, but that the claims of Christianity, that God exists, that he became man in the form of Jesus, that he died and rose again, is actually what happened. So apologia is saying, well, what's the evidence for that? Because if it's true, we should have evidence for it. Am I right? I want us to understand apologetics, we have to understand the three reasons why people reject God. Fundamentally. There's lots of reasons, but they come down to three. One is intellectual. There's not enough evidence for me to believe in God. There's an inconsistency, there's a contradiction with what I see in the world and what the Bible claims. And so intellectually, I cannot logically believe in God. That's the first reason, is intellectual. The second reason is emotional. There is too much suffering for me to believe in God. Maybe they got that phone call from the doctor. Maybe they got that knock at the door with the policeman with a hat in his hand. Maybe there was something that happened, a sickness of some sort. Something happened. There's evil that a person has experienced and are so emotionally wounded by it. I just can't trust that there's a good God out there. Very common. And then third is volitional. Volitional simply means I don't want to believe in God. I want to be God. Right? I want to be the supreme authority. I am the captain of my own fate. I want to live life the way I want to live life, and I don't want God to be a part of that picture. So it's intellectual, emotional, and volitional. Now, let me ask you something. Out of those three, what would you say is the most common that you've seen in your life? Emotional. Volitional is a big one. What would you say is the second? At least second. Emotional. What is probably actually the least? Interestingly, and yet, which is the reason do you think that most people claim not to believe? Very much intellectual. See, here's the issue, is that our minds are very full of clutter. There are doubts, there are questions, but we're not just intellectual beings, are we? We're emotional beings, we're volitional beings, meaning we feel things, we want things, we desire things, we trust things, we distrust things. And so if it was just a matter of being, like a Star Trek Vulcan, totally logical, for those of you who are nerds in here, that is very illogical of you to think that. That's not how we work, is it? We can have doubts and fears and emotions and other desires get in the way, and that can act like clutter between us and God. What apologetics does is it deals with the intellectual questions that people have about Christianity. Now, here's the issue, though. As we just said, what is actually the least common reason people disbelieve? Is intellectual. Well, if that's the least common reason that people tend to disbelieve, well, then what's the point of apologetics? Because look at some of these questions. Some of these questions sound familiar that you've heard people ask. How can God be all good and all powerful if evil exists? Does there seem to be an intellectual disconnect there with what we experience and what the Bible says? Doesn't science contradict God? It doesn't. We're going to talk about that. Was Jesus even a real historical figure? What's the evidence for believing he even existed? How do we know that the Gospels that we have now are what was originally written? These are legitimate questions. Perfectly legitimate questions that do have perfectly legitimate answers. What apologetics does is it clears this clutter away. It comes in and it works on removing these questions as obstacles. It answers the intellectual side of things. But, as we've said, intellectual is what? The least reason people actually believe it. But it's also the most common one that people claim is the reason, especially in our culture today. In other words, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Here's why apologetics matters. Because for so many people don't actually know why they reject God. Let me say that again. Many people don't even actually know why they reject God. They may think it's intellectual. Well, it's because of this question that I have. But in reality, it's because they had a really bad experience at a church one time. They may say, well, it's because of this intellectual, philosophical quandary that I have that God just doesn't seem to match up. Actually, it's just because you want to be able to have however many girlfriends you want to have. But many people have fooled themselves. How many of us can fool ourselves sometimes? I know I can. Right? The best liar in the world is me, and the one most likely to believe me is me. And so we are so good at fooling ourselves and justifying our own behavior. What apologetics does is it clears the way to the water, and it removes the clutter. And once those questions have been answered, what's left is, okay, now what's your reason for rejecting God? There's a well-known apologist nowadays named Cliff Knechtle. Anybody ever heard of him? He's been for about 40 years now. He's been going around to college campuses, and he has a series called Give Me an Answer. Literally, he goes to a college campus, sticks a mic in the center of the common area, has his mic, says, hey, I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor, let's talk. And college students come up and they ask him questions and they talk about it. And one thing that he tells the story of is his son, Stuart, who went to, I think it was Harvard, somewhere like that, somewhere really high up. And he said that his son had an interesting experience where many nights he would be staying up late with his friends. They would be asking him, grilling him with questions about his faith. And one night, it was getting really late. They had tests the next day. He said, hey guys, look, it's getting really late, right? We got projects due that we definitely have not been putting it off at all. If these questions are actually what's keeping you away from God, then let's keep going. We'll stay up all night if we had to. He said, but look, if these are just excuses because you want to sleep with who you want to sleep with, let's just go ahead and go to bed now. And he said, it's amazing how often they would say, yeah, no, you're right. We just want to live how we want to live. You see, many times people think that what keeps them from God are these questions. But once these questions have been answered, suddenly the path is cleared to that source of water. And now they are confronted with the question, why do you actually reject God? And that is an open path for the Holy Spirit now to convict and work in them. We can take a horse to the water, but we can't make him drink. We can bring people to Christ. We can bring them to his presence, but ultimately it's between them and God what happens from there. So this is why apologetics matters. Okay, is one, because non-Christians have good questions. Not every non-Christian's question is a gotcha. Not every non-Christian is just trying to get you with their questions. There are genuinely good questions out there. And they need to be answered. They deserve to be answered. Because as Christians, are we making some pretty bold claims about what we believe? We believe that God exists. We believe that God became human, that he suffered and died for a sinful world, and then he came back to, that this man, this person, Jesus, actually came back to life. That's a pretty big claim, isn't it? And so it's perfectly reasonable to have big questions about that. And we need to be ready to answer them. And then second, and just more personally, apologetics strengthens our faith in times of doubt. Because we all have times of doubt. We all have times where we're wondering, again, be it intellectual, emotional, volitional, be it because I have a question I hadn't thought of before, be it because I'm going through something difficult right now and I'm not sure what to do with it, or be it because, look, God, I just want to do things my own way and I'm not sure how to come back to you. We all go through these times of doubt. And the best way to combat what you don't know is to go back to what you do know. Is to fall back to, well, I may not know why God would allow this evil thing to happen, but what do I know about God's character? I may not know why God doesn't want me to make a certain choice, but what do I know about what he wants for me? And so understanding apologetics gives us more of a foundation, more of a broad platform of things that we know about God that we can fall back onto when we have times where it seems like all we can think about is what we don't know. So this is why apologetics matters. It's important for the people around us so we can maximize how effective we are as witnesses, as salt and light, and it just helps us to become better. And plus, why wouldn't you want to learn more about God, about the world He made, about how He works, about how amazing it is that all these amazing things we believe is actually true? What we're going to do now is we're going to take a 10-minute break before we move. It's already been like about almost 50 minutes. And so we're going to take about a 10-minute break here. 10 minutes, we said? And we're going to go to our third question, which is, what is truth? So I believe like I said, bathrooms through those doors over there.
There we have coffee, we have snacks, we have water. So please avail yourself of anything you need.
And just so you know, at the very end, we'll have a Q&A time.